kids, Gloomwood is finally in early fucking access. I normally leave that bit uncensored, but YouTube frowns upon adult language within the first minute or so of a video, so we gotta stretch it out a bit. From the mind of Dillon Rogers, with a little co-developing from one David Szymanski and published by New Blood Interactive, Gloomwood is a first-person survival game with an emphasis on stealth and immersive sim mechanics. As the website says, it's basically Thief with guns. Set in a fantastical Victorian world that is experiencing some strange happenings, we play as the Doctor, who is abducted by a group of leather-clad, glowy-eyed ruffians who work for someone called the Countess. Why the Countess wants the Doctor brought before her is anyone's guess at this point in time, but for the purposes of the early access content, we as the Doctor are tasked with escaping custody and venturing out to the shoreline towards a mysterious lighthouse, where a strange benefactor appears to be waiting for us. Gloomwood was first announced back in 2020 and released a demo during the PC gaming show of that same year, so to say the anticipation for this one has been through the roof is a massive fucking understatement. Oh, thank God I can drop F-bombs now. Christ, that was hard. In fact, the hype machine has been so hyped for this over the last 2 years that New Blood might as well have released their own Daikatana-style ad for it. Dillon Rogers is going to make you use stealth. Slow it down. Kids, I have been running this channel and making content for it and immersing myself in the indie retro shooter scene for just a little under 2 years now, but I've also been a gamer for over 30 years of my life, and let me tell you, I have rarely ever seen the kind of anticipation for an indie early access title, let alone a big budget AAA game, as I've seen with Gloomwood. The discourse, the hype, the memes, the sheer fucking trembling desire for gamers to get their petty little fingers on this release has been wild. Hell, New Blood released Gloomwood into early access a day early, and it lit up the Steam charts. Between the legions of retro fans who fell in love with the concept after the debut of the demo, and Dave Oshry putting his entire bag into Twitter promos, I think that, maybe even including Dusk, Gloomwood might be the most anticipated New Blood game to date. So with all of those expectations fully and heavily shoved into the inventory backpack for the game to shoulder, how does the initial batch of content for Gloomwood stack up? Well, after playing through the early access content twice in a row back to back, I can confidently say that Gloomwood is easily shaping up to be one of the best games I've ever played, even if it feels like there isn't a whole lot of it to play at the moment. But let's not focus on that yet. First, let's talk about the game itself, which, shit, where do I even begin? Gloomwood impresses on literally every aspect of gameplay and design, so let's start with the first thing that we see, the graphics. The game looks like it's straight out of how you remember games from 1999 actually looked. Detailed high-res texture mapping on lower polygon models, dynamic lighting and colored lighting, particle and fog effects, complemented with some excellent sprite work here and there, but done with the kind of modern flair and gorgeous production design of modern retro shooters. The model work here isn't actually low poly, but I'll be damned if it doesn't mimic it incredibly well. From the minute the game opened, I was transported back to being 17 and playing games like Jedi Knight and System Shock 2. The use of dynamic light in the game is painstakingly brilliant, and really dialing in your personal brightness and gamma settings is going to be key to getting the most out of your stealthy experience. Shadows and darkness are deep and dark, which makes you appreciate any sources of illumination around you. The game's lighting effects really get shown off once the good doctor eventually finds a lantern while exploring a cave, which itself is littered with glowing mushrooms and rocks and ore in the walls that resemble the stars at night. As you can see from this footage, Gloomwood is fucking gorgeous. A massive upgrade from the demo that came out back in 2020, and this is one of the game's biggest strengths. Being able to look down the coastline towards the ultimate goal of the lighthouse, with the draw distance being obscured by fog and atmosphere, is not only remarkable, but incredibly immersive and atmospheric. Another impressive feat the game pulls off is sound design. Without any sort of hesitation, I'd say that this is a game that requires headphones. Creaking wood, rustling leather, rushing water, sliding steel, each and every sound heard in the game has such a breadth of texture and depth to it that just listening to everything going on in the game is just as satisfying as watching it. Plus, in keeping with the need for stealthy movements in game, sound is directional, so you'll constantly be paying attention to where each sounds are coming from as you hear them. There's even a mechanic to lean against doors and listen to what's on the other side, with sounds on the other side of the door growing louder as you do so, which, if that's ever been done in a game before, I've certainly never seen it, and it made me giddy. One part of the initial tutorial informs the player that walking over certain surfaces, like metal for example, will create more noise than walking over other surfaces. The moment I heard the doctor's footsteps on metal versus wood, it again took me all the way back to being 17 and playing Jedi Knight, which is the first game that I remember playing where the footsteps sounded different when walking over different surfaces. Both the visual and audio design have gotten such polish and attention to detail, it would be difficult to not be impressed while playing Gloomwood. But now we have to ask, how does the game actually play? The gameplay in Gloomwood absolutely fucks. I mentioned that I played through the content twice over. Now, the first time I played through was more rigid and mechanical as I learned the lay of the land and what to expect. And then the second time was more loose and experimental since I knew then what I could get away with. I'm actually kind of disappointed that I didn't record any footage of my second playthrough because I managed to pull off some cool gameplay and I even found a weapon I'd missed the first time around. But let's get down to basics first. Gloomwood's gameplay is oriented around stealth, first and foremost. The Doctor isn't the Doomslayer or Duke Nukem or Dusk Dude or any other FPS protag whose name starts with a D. He's a proper Victorian doctor with a cane sword and a suitcase full of oddities, just trying to make it in this world and get the hell out of Dodge in one piece. In other words, wading directly into combat is more than likely going to get you killed unless you're really careful about it. Of course, that doesn't mean that the Doctor isn't lethal. You sneak up behind enemies while brandishing your cane sword, and you can do a charged stab attack which will one-hit enemies, and it'll so fucking satisfying. If you're spotted, though, and combat is the only frantic option to try and get out of a bad spot, you can swing and block with your sword. But these assholes can take a few swings from the sword before falling to the ground, meaning they have ample opportunity to get in a few hits of their own using axes or torches, providing moments of tense melee action. And a lot of them are carrying rifles, which could potentially two-shot you depending on your current state of health, so you really don't want to face the business end of one of those. However, the Doctor does find at least two other weapons here in the early access, the revolver and the shotgun. The revolver, though, that should be thought of more as a tool than a weapon, as it takes something like 4 to 5 bullets to kill a guard, which is pretty much an entire chamber and a complete waste of bullets. While I do understand that the whole point of the game isn't to go wading into combat Dirty Harry style, I do kind of wish the revolver did a little bit more damage, so it felt at least kind of useful in combat. Alas, the revolver is more suited to creating noise or exploding barrels from a distance than it is as a straight-on combat option. In fact, if you're using it for mayhem, it's really only mostly handy on the cave dogs. Yes, I did kill the dogs. I am a monster. And also a cat person. The shotgun, on the other hand, which comes in late in the content, is a bad motherfucker and can and will take out a guard in one shot. Thankfully, the point in which you first receive it is at a point where you don't need as much stealth to get through to the end, so you can go ham a little bit and exercise extreme prejudice to get a feel for it. Oh, get fucked. Utilizing stealth mechanics is surprisingly intuitive and powerful. Early on in the game, the Doctor is given a ring which will show how visible he is to surrounding enemies. The more visible you are, the more it glows. Leaning left and right can allow you to peek around corners, crouching lets you make less noise as you move, and if you really need to be as quiet as possible, holding down the shift key puts the Doctor into sneak mode. You will be spending so much time in sneak mode. Between the number of guards and the sound of your footsteps and the nature of the environments themselves, be prepared to take it slow and steady throughout the course of this game because one wrong move without surveying the environment means that you'll be deader than dead within seconds. Compounding the need for caution is that there is no traditional save game at work here. Instead, the Doctor will need to find a phonograph somewhere in the environment and utilize that as a save point. One nice thing about this mechanic is that the phonographs play a gentle, lilting piano piece which can be heard when you're close enough, like a siren's call, letting you know, "Oh hey bud, it's probably been a minute, you better come find me and save your fucking game." Which is a neat mechanic, and can sometimes be frustrating when you've slowly crawled your way forward for 15 minutes or so, and you run into trouble, and you die, and you load back at the last phonograph 15 minutes back, and you're like, well, shit. But overall, the save points are, I feel, spaced out enough to feel as fair as possible, but also to hammer home the risk and reward aspects of the stealth gameplay. You really do have to check yourself and your environments as you push forward, desperate for a save point, and feeling super victorious when you finally move into the next environment. Right now, Gloomwood has 3 environments to explore: the fishery, the mines, and the coastline. The fishery, where we start out, feels like the most dense of the 3 environments and is probably where you'll spend most of your time in this initial release. There's multiple floors and guards and pathways and feels intentionally designed to allow players to get used to the game feel and experiment with gameplay before venturing out into the harsh world where the world slowly ramps up more and more with more difficult survival situations. The mines are a fun, yet short diversion where we get to play with light, sound, non-human enemies, and the coastline comprises the most forward momentum we experienced so far, journeying from point to point until we reach the lighthouse and the end of the current batch of content. There's so much to play with and experience in Gloomwood throughout the first bit of game we're getting here. Gloomwood, while clearly modeled after stealth games like Thief, is an immersive sim through and through. Both times I played through, I had vastly different experiences, and again, I really wish I'd recorded that second playthrough because holy shit. Gloomwood's mechanics are simple but versatile. If you look at an object and it lights up, you can pick it up. This means one of two things. You can either carry the object around or store it in your inventory. Objects that you can only carry can be manipulated in the environment, like stacking crates or hiding bodies, or throwing smaller objects like bottles and buckets to create diversions. Meanwhile, the Doctor's inventory is a grid-based interface stored within his briefcase. Kind of sounded like Eminem for a second. A grid-based interface stored within his briefcase. So fucking stupid. He will automatically pick up anything smaller than a bucket, such as glass bottles and severed limbs. And apparently at some point in the future, the Doctor will be able to research various items, which is super fucking cool to think about. Almost everything in the environment is interactable as well, so your options for either getting attention or distracting enemies are basically up to your imagination. Some crates have labels on them, indicating precious items that they contain, such as ammunition or health syringes that the Doctor can inject himself with if his health gets too low. Which, if you play like I do, is kind of like a toddler fumbling around in the dark with some stairs nearby, so you're gonna need the health items. Also, pay attention to the labels on the boxes and don't be like me and ignore this box that said health inside. When I've played, I went back over this footage and I felt like an idiot. Food can also be found and consumed to regain slight amounts of health, but they don't nearly give back as much as the syringes do. And part of the fun of Gloomwood is experimenting with the objects in the world and figuring out how best to utilize them for your escape plans. For example, there are red exploding barrels in the game that, if you shoot them, they'll light on fire for a brief moment before exploding soon afterwards. At first I tried to figure out how to manipulate guards into walking past one so I could shoot the barrel and blow up the bastards, but then I started picking up barrels and sneaking them into place behind guards. It's little things like that that make Gloomwood feel alive with gleeful potential. If you're a fan of immersive sims, you've probably already gotten the gist here and you'll feel right at home within Gloomwood's world. If, like me, you're not the biggest fan of stealth or Imsims, you'll still have a great time with this game. Going into this, I figured I was going to have to do a lot of mental backflips adjusting my playstyle to something slower, more measured and cautious, and while it was a little rough at first, it wasn't as demanding as I imagined it would be. Sure, this isn't really my genre or type of game that I normally enjoy, but there's something intuitive about Gloomwood that gently takes you by the hand without you even realizing it, before sending you off into the world like a big boy with big plans for college. I thoroughly enjoyed what Gloomwood has to offer here so far. The setup is mysterious and intriguing, the world is alive and demanding, and the current batch of content ends with a tease involving the Countess offering a parlay if you'll only just meet her. Whatever her plans are for the Doctor, she really wants to meet this guy, either by kidnapping him or just negotiating with him. I mean, the meetup is obviously a trap, but you know. Now, something I will say, and this is something I've seen echoed on Steam, is it's kind of hard to not feel like this currently isn't very much content for the opening of the early release of the game. Which, I'll admit that when I got to the end of the content, I felt a little let down, like, oh, okay, I guess that's it for now. You know, just as the game was building up to something really interesting and cool story-wise, it concludes and offers a glimpse at what they're still working on. Which is fine. Graven did the same thing at the end of its first batch of content, and while I did feel slightly shortchanged at first, I think I know the reason why. See, most early access games that I've played for this channel are usually fast-paced shooters where there's a lot going on, and for the 3 to 4 hours of gameplay we get per content update, that feels like a whole hell of a lot packed into those 3 or 4 hours, as there is constant running and gunning and exploring in danger. Gloomwood, for the most part, has a much more measured pace that asks the player to move slower and is less densely populated than most early access shooters. There's quite a bit to see and do and experience here, but my first playthrough clocked in at just a little over 2.5 hours, while my second came in at just under an hour and a half. That's a grand total of just over 4 hours for you kids still struggling with math. I think that players who are complaining about a lack of satisfaction at the amount of content are actually experiencing something that is more measured and paced differently than other early access releases, which in turn makes this feel like it isn't very much content on the outset. After all, there are stretches of the game where there's literally nobody around, but we're meant to explore, journey, investigate, and otherwise play with the environment rather than burst fire our way through. Part of the allure of the game is that there's so much below the surface level engagement of the game. You can move forward, go back, find alternate routes and shortcuts, discover hidden caches of ammunition and supplies. Hell, there's an entire weapon that I missed the first time I played through, hinted at in a map that the doctor finds near the end of the content, but it's in a cave all the way back near the beginning of the game at the fishery. So, rather than trundle all the way back to the fishery, which you can do, because it's all interconnected, I started a new game and found the cave with the safe and input the combination and found the motherfucking Undertaker gun. This goddamn masterpiece of a weapon is a silenced gat that fires bolts, either incendiary rounds or heavy slugs. Incendiary rounds do what the label says, and they light things on fire, while heavy slugs can shatter lights or press buttons from afar or just create a distracting sound. But holy good goddamn, did this thing change the power dynamics in my second run. Fun fact, if you light a guard on fire and they touch another guard, the other guards light on fire too. They fall down dead not too long afterwards. It's super satisfying. Now, of course, in examining all of this, we must invoke the question: what are we, the gamers, owed for initial early release content? The answer is nothing. Give developers money if you believe in their product. No, seriously, if you believe in their product and you want to support it, give them your money and you will get what you get when you get it. Now, that might seem a little harsh and should be applied situationally, I guess. But even though I also at first felt like this was a little less content than I was expecting, I had to take a step back and put other factors into consideration. For example, Gloomwood is easily the single most polished early access title that I have played at launch. Hands down. Aside from some pathfinding issues for the AI that popped up twice throughout my entire experience, the graphics, the sound, the gameplay, the music, the entirety of this experience is polished and nailed down and absolutely professional. This feels like final release quality. Dillon Rogers put the work in, as evidenced by the fact that Gloomwood's release was even pushed back by a couple of weeks so that they could tighten up a couple aspects of the game. I've played other early access titles that, while enjoyable to play immediately at launch, still had quite a few issues and glitches and graphical mishaps that would eventually receive attention. Part of the early access experience is getting to follow a game as it grows and develops and transforms into the final product. And if Gloomwood is this polished and playable and fucking impressive to behold at this point in the early access, then holy shit, I can't wait to see what comes next. I also enjoyed the tongue-in-cheek underdevelopment tape stretched over the entrance to the tavern close to the end, an area that the content tease states is going to be coming up next, along with the marketplace area. Gloomwood surprised me. I played the 2020 demo and I liked it, but wasn't impressed with the game at that point, even understanding that it wasn't my style of game that I would normally play. So again, going into this, I was expecting to be technically impressed by it, but probably not as engaged as I would like to be. And yet, holy shit, kids, Gloomwood sucked me in and dragged me along and refused to let me go. From graphics to gameplay, everything here has been fine-tuned to perfection. And this is any indication of where it is headed. Gloomwood has a head start on being Game of the Year for whatever year it goes into full release. I'm giving this a 9 out of 10 thus far, and I can't wait to see more. Alright kids, thanks for coming down on this dive into the early access sphere once more. It is almost spooky month, and I've got a couple of great games lined up to play in October specifically for that theme. I'll be taking a break from the history videos until November just so I can play some horror related titles. So thank you for watching. Remember to stay hydrated, sit up straight, and maybe pack yourself a lunch or something today, even if it's just an apple and some peanut butter. Stay safe out there. We'll see you next time.
It's all a merchant's daughter, they're brought up in Callio. Hurrah, the other girl, do let me go. She took me in the parlor and said, won't you be me beau? Hurrah, the other girl, do let me go. Oh, do